Good evening to you all, and welcome to our regularly scheduled work session that usually occurs in about the last Tuesday of each month. So that's what we're doing tonight. So our procedure is a little bit different. And one of the things we often do is regular meetings is have an invocation. We don't schedule that for here, but if you'll indulge me, I'm going to ask you, if you will, maybe as a act of remembrance and solitude with our sister city, Raleigh, suffered a tragedy and death, as you all know. Just recently, I had the opportunity to attend one of the memorial services. So I'm going to ask you, if you will, maybe to just join me in a brief moment of silence in recognition and in memory of the tragedy that occurred there. So if you will, just join me now. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Madam Clerk, I'll ask you, if you will, to call the roll as we begin our meeting.
Mayor Marshburn.
I am present.
Mayor Pro Tem Vance.
Here.
Councilmember Behringer. Here. Councilmember Dellinger.
Here.
Councilmember Matthews.
Here.
And Councilmember Singleton.
Here.
Okay, thank you so very much. And the next order of business is the adoption of the agenda. Council, what say you? You have it before you.
So moved. Second.
Okay, motion properly made and seconded. If you favor the motion, would you vote aye?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposition? And there is none. Okay, item C, under presentation, looking forward to recognizing a very new staff member with us. So I'm going to recognize, yes, there she is, Ms. Miller, who will make the presentation. Ms. Miller.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. It's with great pleasure that I introduce you to our new budget manager, Sarah Warren. Ms. Warren brings 15 years of budgetary and financial management experience in local government to the town of Garner. She has served as a fiscal and policy analyst with Wake County's Budget and Management Services, and also as the budget officer for the Wake County Sheriff's Office. Since 2019, Ms. Warren has been the senior budget management analyst with the city of Raleigh, where she's prepared and developed annual budgets totaling of over $1 billion, both operating and capital. Ms. Warren has earned a Bachelor's of Art degree in Political Science and has an MPA, both from North Carolina State. She participated in the Local Government Leading for Results Fellowship Program with UNC at the School of Government and has completed her coursework for this Lean Six Sigma Green and Black Belts. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Ms. Warren this evening, and I'll ask her to come to the podium and say a few comments to the council. Ms. Warren?
Welcome.
Mayor and Council, thank you so much. Sarah Warren. Really happy to be here. So this is day 2, and it's been really great so far. I've had a really great, warm welcome by everybody on staff, and so it just makes me really excited. So I don't know if y'all have any questions for me, but I'm always here. My door's open. Jody knows how to find me as well, so I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, yes, I suspect council will want to make at least a comment or ask a question, so I usually give them an opportunity to do that, but I'll take privilege first to say welcome. We look forward to getting this position filled for some time, as you probably know, and looking at your background, obviously it appears you have a lot of experience, and so we're looking to hear great things from you as you lead in this effort. I'm hesitant to ask, but I guess since I've set it up, I will ask. I noticed some coursework that it talks about the Sigma Green and Black Belts. When I think of black belts, I think of certain physical engagements and so forth, but do you care to just make a comment about that?
Yeah, sure. So several years ago, I went through NC State's textile apparel management program. Through their School of Textiles, offers green belts and black belt coursework for process improvement, and really they kind of aim it at the textile industry. That's kind of where it started, but they've opened it up for all industries to come and take the coursework. Unfortunately, I was working with trying to complete the actual certification Due to the timing and the sample size, I wasn't able to actually complete the certification, but all the coursework has been completed. So a lot of those skills are facilitative leadership, a lot of statistical and data analysis involved in that. So it's just really built upon the work that I did in my undergrad and my graduate program.
Thank you very much for indulging my question there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, council, any comments you care to make at this point? I recognize Ms. Behringer first.
We're so happy to have you here. I remember when I first got involved in public service in Garner, we did not have a budget manager. And we have come a long way, and we are so happy to have you fill that position and help us grow Garner forward.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay, Mr. Vance, anything?
I'd like to say welcome to Ms. Warren, welcome to the position, and I hope that you have much success while you're here.
Ellinger?
Yeah, just welcome. We talked briefly. You came at the right time to get kind of situated before you jump right into the thick of things. So welcome, glad to have you.
England?
You jump right in on your second day. This foreign sounding thing called the Revenue Savings Plan, you probably weren't familiar with and how that operated, and so you kind of got thrown into the fire, but it's a good way to learn, for sure. So welcome, and glad to have you. Look forward to working with you.
Matthews?
Just welcome aboard. We are growing and your timing is right, and I think you'll enjoy working here.
So far, so good.
Good, okay. Well, thank you for your time, and shall I say, we'll invite her to stay for the rest of the meeting if she needs to, but otherwise she can be excused, I would imagine. But thank you, Ms. Miller. Anything else you'd like to say will be fine.
Just to add that we are thrilled to have Ms. Warren here to be part of our budget team and our budget process. She brings a lot of skills and experience, and not only in budgeting, but about the region. And we're looking to really use her experiences and skills to help us work with our budget issues and continue to manage the growth we see in the town. So we're looking forward to working.
Great, okay. Thanks again. Good to see you. Okay, that's the one presentation. I believe we have others, staff. Okay.
That's it for tonight. Thanks.
Okay, all right, thanks. All right, we'll get now into the discussion part of our work session this evening, and the first item is going to be led by Assistant Manager Hodges as it relates to the request for support of affordable housing, a topic we talked about some earlier, and we're coming back to that. So, John?
Yes, sir, Mayor and members of council. At the September work session, you heard a request from Bradley Housing Developers and Kelly Development Company for financing support, gap financing support for an affordable rental housing project. Just as a reminder, that project that was then known as Tryon Point, you'll hear more about a name change for that in a moment, is 176 units of 100 of rental properties, rather. And there was a request made for gap financing that would finance a gap of $1 million above what Wake County could contribute to this project through their policies that they currently have in place. Sensing some interest from council to consider supporting this project, our management team took the guidelines that were developed for the use of ARP funding and scored this project. The funding that had been discussed to be considered for this project was one-time funding that council had chosen to earmark from the ARP fund allocation. We scored that project, and it did score a 32 using the criteria that council approved, which put it in the high level of support for this type project. We then looked at the request and looked at the amount of money that was available through the one-time use, and feel like that we believe in the project. We believe it's a good project. We believe it's a unique opportunity for Garner because it is one of the only parcels that could qualify for this type of project in the area, given the census tract designation, that it was worthy of support. But we did feel like that there were probably some other affordable housing initiatives that council might want to look at in the future. And if we allocated all of the monies you had earmarked from ARP towards one project, you wouldn't have that opportunity. So with the scoring and the interest from council and the way that it aligns with some of the priorities that we've talked about recently, staff is coming forward tonight with a recommendation of providing gap financing in a $500,000 amount. This is a 30-year payable loan. There would be interest paid after starting in year 3 with a balloon payment at the end of the term. And so that is a staff recommendation that's coming forward tonight. The developer's representative, Ted Helbron, is also here, and he has some additional updated information about the project since you saw him in September. So if it pleases the council and the mayor, we'll pull his presentation up and let him make a presentation, and then we can answer questions now, or we can answer questions after he's done.
Yes, I'll be happy to hear from him, please. Thank you for coming back to be with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And test my remembering of the technology here in council chambers. So again, Mayor, Council, thank you very much for giving us another opportunity to speak in front of you. As you'll see on the screen, in an effort to pivot away from any confusion from the neighbor project to the north, we've renamed this project from Tryon Point to Tryon Station. So as we talk about affordable housing, sometimes we get lost in conversations about AMI and housing type, and sometimes it's a more effective lens to look at the affordability issues facing a region through a single housing unit. And so in the last 24 hours, we spent a little bit of time on Zillow and picked a townhouse that we think is listed today and emblematic of the issues that we hope our project goes a small way towards addressing. The unit that I'm going to talk about for a minute here is at 171 Bailey Court in Garner. It's about 3/4 of a mile south of council chambers where we are tonight. It's a split townhouse. It's a really nice housing unit. It's a 2-bedroom, 3-bathroom, 1,500 square foot townhouse that last sold in 2015 for about $90,000. This townhouse is listed today for about $280,000. And what it indicates is that the cost of for sale housing in Garner on the margin has gone up by about 300% over the last decade. When we using Zillow's methodology of looking at the cost of housing, not just the price point of it, if you look at what a mortgage would cost, what real estate taxes cost, what maintenance and upkeep would cost, what HOA fees would cost, to buy this townhouse today requires a monthly payment of just short of $2,000. That's effectively an 85 to 90% AMI monthly housing payment, which for a family of 4 here locally is equivalent to about $90,000 plus in total household annual income. As we look across the rest of the town at different housing products and types and price points, on the for sale side, obviously, you see townhouses and predominantly single family homes. We've spent some time looking at what cost of existing product, 20-year-old product like the townhouse that we just referenced, and also looking at where price points are for product that are being delivered by the home building community today. And those price points, not surprisingly, are certainly higher than they were 7 years ago, but more importantly, they're certainly higher than the income, a workforce level income here in the town would allow someone to afford. On the for rent side, again, looking at new construction apartments and where the price points they're being delivered at, but also where some of the existing apartment stock in the town is priced today. These are still rent levels that are above where a 60% AMI workforce resident would be able to afford their rent if affordability was gauged at 30% of their pre-tax income. The net takeaway from just a brief level of 30,000 foot analysis is that unfortunately the private development community is not delivering new units at levels that are affordable to Garner's workforce population. And so outside of projects like the one that we are continuing to push forward in the northern part of the town, there's not a market-based solution today to help solve the housing gap that exists here in Garner, but also, again, everywhere across the state. The last thing I wanted to mention before making myself available for any questions, Mayor, members of council, were well aware of some of the recent low-income housing tax credit projects that had been developed in the town recently. So Timber Spring was built by Evergreen. The Pennington Grove projects were built by DHIC, who are, as the Wake County Affordable folks mentioned, a best-in-class affordable housing developer here in the area. They're all fantastic projects. The problem is that they're effectively the only low-income housing tax credit projects that have been built in the town. The LIHTC program was started in the late 80s. So effectively, over 30 years, there's 250 odd units that have been built. And so the tax credit that we plan on using doesn't naturally create projects on an annual basis that would end up in the town for a variety of reasons that I certainly won't waste your time with tonight. But in closing, what we'd like to say is that we are really excited about potentially being a small piece of a larger solution here in the town to help house folks that are critical to how the town functions and the workforce it needs to continue to grow forward. So happy to answer any questions you might have, and hopefully this context was a little bit helpful as you parse through your decision.
Don? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir. I was just going to say we're both here available for questions, as is the rest of the management team. From a process standpoint, what we're asking of council is to give us guidance on whether or not you're interested in moving forward with providing financing and at what level, and then we will bring that back in the form of a resolution at the next meeting, and that is a step that would be needed for the financing package to be developed for the project. We would follow up with the formalities of agreements and so forth later than that, but I think the next thing would be a letter of commitment for the funding that the development team could then go ahead and complete their funding package and their financing application.
That's correct. We'll be submitting a final application to NCHFA by the end of the year, and with that would come a commitment letter, not final funding documents and not the actual funding action, but just a commitment letter from the town.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, and we'll recognize council. I will just observe as the mayor, I believe this is a very worthy project, and it sort of fits in with what I think this council has been talking about in terms of affordable housing, at least one way to take some action in that regard. So, council, I'll hear from you at this point in time, and if you have questions for either one of these gentlemen, Phil, I'll start with you. Do you have anything?
I think this is a good project, and I'll just cut chase. I'm ready to move forward with it.
Mr. Singleton?
Yes, Mr. Hodges, there's currently a construction project, apartment complex project that's adjacent to the Pine Winds and Greenbrier communities. That's some type of low-income housing project also, is that
It
not
is,
correct? It's just
yes.
not open yet, I mean, it's under construction.
Correct.
Okay.
And as I mentioned at the previous work session, that's a similar type project, and at the time that the financing package was being done for it, the support was not needed from the municipality beyond what they already had in their financing, and with this project, they've encountered some gaps in that funding, but not too different of a project.
Berenger, anything?
A worthwhile project, and I look forward to moving forward with it.
Okay, and Mr. Dellinger?
I agree. I just have I guess a question for staff in sort of what changed between when it came before us the first time. There was an existing gap of $1 million, and it was kind of scoffed at to ask for 2% because it throw things off, and now it's half the amount of what the gap was. So the question is, what changed, and then how's that gap going to be filled, and what impact does that have on the developer?
I'll take the first part of that question, and the developer can take the second part. The first time this came to you, we presented that as we stated in the agenda. We presented it at the full request from the developer. So we did not present it with any staff recommendation. We wanted to get input from council. So that number of $1 million was simply the amount above Wake County's policy. So we presented you the full request and did not do any analysis at the time as to whether or not we were recommending the full request. Showing your interest in the project, we went back and analyzed it and feel like that while it's certainly council's discretion, the $500,000 would allow you to have some of your ARP one-time dollars available for other affordable housing or housing affordability type projects. So nothing changed in our opinion of the project. It was just analyzing the project and making a recommendation. Does that answer your question, Mr. Dellinger?
Sort of.
The gap is still $1 million.
I'll take the other half of the question because I think that'll help kind of give you a comprehensive answer. So the gap hasn't changed. We, in consultation with staff, were made to understand that $500,000 was the number and not $1 million, and that's fine. So we'd had conversations with Wake County, and they continue to remain supportive, and they're willing to consider expanding their commitment beyond the guidelines that they had set for themselves in their RFP document from the beginning of the year. And so we think the last $500,000 can be secured from the county.
Okay. I just knew that it was kind of, it seemed it was presented as.
Money did not magically
integral
disappear
and-
out of the budget.
Okay,
Correct.
I just wanted to make sure you all were still sort of able to move forward in not a less favorable financial situation, because, you know.
Very much appreciate your
Okay.
concern. Frankly, we're just very thankful that Garner's willing to help support us.
Thank you.
And we did confirm with Wake County that they're appreciative of us being supportive of the project. That was one of their goals, is to have the municipality participating. And we also got a sense from Wake County that the level of participation that we were proposing seemed appropriate for the community size and the project size.
All right, thank you both.
Vance, any questions, observations?
Well, I would say I believe it's a worthwhile project. Workforce housing is needed and necessary, and I'm in support of moving forward with the recommendation of the current cost proposed.
All right, there's no reason why we can't vote on this proposal, that is to consider financing in the amount of $500,000. Or do we need to do that in a regular session?
You would vote in the regular session, but if, I guess, a thumbs up for consensus, that will give staff direction to prepare the resolution.
So come back at our next meeting for a formal vote, is that right? Okay.
Yes, sir, and then I'll ask if council would be okay with that being on the consent agenda, or if you prefer it being on your regular agenda.
On the agenda sign, we
Okay.
discussed it twice, so
We'll prepare that for the consent agenda at the next meeting.
Well, let me get thumbs up from
I
council.
think you got
We've done that
6
before.
verbal thumbs up already.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sure enough. We're glad you're gonna be able to move forward, sure enough, okay. All right, next item is of considerable interest to a lot of people, I'm sure. So this has to do with the South Garner Greenway Extension Feasibility Study update. And let's see, Ms. Maria, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I am delighted to be here tonight. I think I bring good news for a change. So I'm feeling very happy about that. So bear with me while I open. Right. So tonight I am bringing to you an update on the South Garner Greenway Extension project. And again, purpose is to give you some information from our most recent update on the feasibility study and to get your direction on the next steps to bring this project forward. Just a bit of background as a sort of remind everyone, as well as if we have members of the public who don't know enough about the project that may be watching on YouTube or Facebook, give them a bit of a background. In 2019, a feasibility study was conducted by the John McAdams Company and it identified 3 potential routes for this Greenway corridor. The project obviously sort of took a little bit of a pause as we all dealt with COVID and a few other things. But in June of 2022, following the adoption of the bond program, we engaged McAdams again to revise and update the Buffalo Road alignment, which has been identified, I think, as the preferred option of the 3 that were presented earlier in 2019. And this revision of the study has been completed this past month. And again, we engaged McAdams again, as they sort of are familiar with the site, to update their prior study. Highlights of the study, as the recommendation is to do a 10-foot multi-use side path with 2-foot shoulders and to cross the lake, which, as you know, it's between the neighborhoods and Lake Benson Park. It would be to develop a 12-foot boardwalk to cross the lake. One of the recommendations that has come up in this feasibility study update is that using curb and gutter and a closed drainage system would maximize the use of the right-of-way for the side path, which would make the project much more realizable. The HOAs on the south side of the road, that does provide the opportunity to acquire easements in addition to the right-of-way that would impact, obviously, fewer property owners than it would be on the north side of the road. There are some constraints on the right-of-way from Naven Lane east to where we have the boathouse right now, as well as east from the bridge all the way to Lake Benson Park. The study is really based on GIS data. So while the recommendation or the concept is that it will fit in the existing right-of-way, there are some locations that will require easements to be purchased, acquired, negotiated. And those specific right-of-way needs will not be known until there's more sort of firm design and surveying done for the project, which would be, again, what we're hoping to get some direction from you this afternoon, or this evening, I should say. Now, this is kind of the revised map, and I don't know if you can see it very clear, if we can blow it up in your screens, but this shows a couple of alternatives. In green, starting at the very top left corner, would show the path going on the south side of Buffalo Road. You will notice a couple of sort of pedestrian crossings. If there's a need to cross the road, those are the points in which a safe crossing will be more likely to be approved by DOT. Where there is a red X are the points where, because of the curvature of the road or perhaps the width of the road, it would be very difficult to have a safe pedestrian crossing. In light green, continuing on the south side, are the areas where it's like a greenish yellow color. It's the areas where the right-of-way might be a bit challenged. And those are the areas that, again, without a more definite survey and additional design work, we will not know specifically what the impact would be. In the earlier iteration of the feasibility study, you may recall that the north side of Buffalo Road was the proposed alignment, and that still shows here in that purple line. And again, it really has to do with if we have some issues of constraints with the right-of-way on the south side, at some point crossing the road might be a necessity. And again, preferred alignment would be on the south side, but just sort of keeping both options available just in case the south side has some real impossible conditions. And the difference in terms of the boardwalk between the north and the side, it's not that big. It's about 50 feet, give or take, linear feet. So that's all very doable. And as a reminder, past Misty Meadows, the idea is for this path to connect with the sidewalk all the way to the Vendora Springs Circle, which doesn't show in the map. And this is just sort of a cropped image that I wanted to sort of make sure that if it was kind of difficult to see in the earlier map, that you can sort of get a sense of where some of those crossings might occur and where some of the right-of-way constraints would cause some design challenges that would have to be addressed. Now, one thing that I had asked the design team working on this project is to sort of explain to me, I'm a visual learner, so I thought this would be an interesting thing to share with people who are not used to seeing right-of-way conversations or right-of-way maps every day. What would be the impact on the road? What would be the impact or what is the right-of-way as we look at it on property? We drive along the road all the time and we know what the road is, but what is the right-of-way? And in this image, they're sort of showing us that in this particular, on Buffalo Road, the existing right-of-way could be between 60 and 75 feet. The existing pavement is between 24 and 34 feet. That's typically your 10-foot lanes, plus there's a middle lane in some parts of this road. In addition to that, the proposed greenway would take about 10 to 12 feet of the right-of-way, and this shows in that little sort of blue marking on this picture. And again, this was really to sort of help us understand better what the impact could be on the right-of-way and how that would change the look of Buffalo Road. Curb and gutter would be something that would make this project work a little bit better. And these images, again, created as sort of illustrations or modeling of how this could look. The first image, the tiny one, that's the way Buffalo Road looks right now, or at least a few weeks before fall came into us, east of Naval Lane. If we use curb and gutter, you will notice in that image, in that rendering, that the majority of the existing landscaping would likely remain. And if there's no curb and gutter, you will notice in the image on the right side that there would have to be some changes and some loss of vegetation in what is now, I believe, primarily homeowners association property. So the benefit of curb and gutter is really to preserve quite a bit of the existing greenery that is along the side of Buffalo Road. And it's a little bit more expensive, which I think will show up in the next couple of slides. The estimated costs that have been escalated to fiscal year ~24 for construction would be about between $3.1 and $3.6 million for the Buffalo Road side path. It's about 1.2 miles, give or take. And then an additional $1.4 million to complete the sidewalk to the Vendora Springs Road Circle. The right-of-way costs that are part of this estimate are truly developed based on GIS data and could change significantly depending on the surveys and the actual property lines. So that's a very important point to make, because you will see in my next slide that has a breakdown of what the right-of-way costs are being estimated at. If we go with the alternative number 1, which is the south side curb and gutter, we'll be looking at the highest price point, $3.6 million. If there's a crossing to the north side, it's a little bit less, and it may involve equally sort of curb and gutter. Without curb and gutter, when we would sort of take a little bit more of the space and have to acquire additional easements perhaps, the cost would be lower, but I think it's a little bit more unpredictable in what the right-of-way costs would be. And then these are the estimated costs for the sidewalk to Vendora Springs. It's about $1.4 million. And that's the report. And what we want to get from you tonight is to get your feedback on this proposed update, get your direction on which direction to go. And pending the above, if you think this is a good way to continue with the project, we will plan for an agenda item to bring a design consultant on board to get us to 100% construction documents.
Okay, we'll give council an opportunity to ask questions. Let me, maybe this is a crazy question, but are the figures that are given here total costs split into the segment that goes from basically Lake Moore to the parks, and or then the second portion is from there down to the Vandora Springs?
Pretty much,
Okay.
yes.
Bill, I'll start with you for questions or comments.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I think it's going to be a great project. It's been long overdue. Drove through there today, and the sidewalk, they put new sewage lines in on Vandora, in case everybody was wondering what was going on down near Old Stage Road. And they've retouched up the sidewalk. So the sidewalk, right as we sit here now, starts at Old Stage Road, right in front of Steel Creek subdivision, on around to Vandora Pines, all the way, then makes a curve on to Buffalo Road. That's already got sidewalk on it. And from there all the way to the park, I think it'd be an excellent thing, because we have Steel Creek, Vandora Pines, Buffalo Grove, the Landings, the Winds, and the Mead. All of these are subdivisions on that south side there. Taxpaying citizens of Garner, and there's well over 1,000 homes probably combined in there. And those folks have been wanting this for a long, long time. It'd be a big safety issue. People ride bikes up and down that road through there and run. And when you get down toward the bridge, it's another story within itself. But I strongly support let's putting this in there. And that will just about, with that little section up on where it's been worked on now in front of Fire Station 3, that will just about complete that entire loop in there. So it's well needed. I'd encourage our board to move forward on this project. Let's make it happen. It'll do great things for that part of the city of Garner, and I strongly support it.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. Mr. Singleton, observations, questions?
Yeah, so the Buffalo Road side path being 10 foot can be used from, the bond money can be, greenway dollars can be used, not sidewalk dollars. And then the sidewalk part will be sidewalk dollars.
I think that's a question to be determined by this body.
And now the piece going from the bridge up to connect at Lake Benson Park will be, was that a 10-foot sideway? Excuse me, 10-foot pathway, excuse me.
Ideally, yes.
Okay. And I think curb and gutter are safer. I don't, it doesn't take out, doesn't have the impact on the landscaping. I don't think the neighbors over there would, don't think Mr. Matthews and his neighbors would like that. All those trees and everything to be cut down, won't have less of an impact, but I think the curb and gutter also gives you a little bit of protection, from people paying attention. It's good to see we're at a $5 million plus project, because we know there can be some changes with some right of way, but, that's better than some of the prices we were talking about at one time. 7.9 million, 8 million. This is at least better than that. So.
Okay, Ms. Behringer.
I'm really happy to see this project finally get to this point, and I'll be even happier when I can go out there and walk on this side path. I have had people for years begging us to do something about the walkability in that area, not being able to walk to the park but having to drive, and the lack of safety if you do try to walk or ride a bicycle. So I'm all in favor of going ahead with this, and I think the curb and gutter is absolutely the correct way to proceed. So thank you for your hard work on this.
Bellinger?
I guess I have to disclose I live off Buffalo Road before I talk, but it is dangerous, and it is interesting that all the people that live down there can't walk to the park. And if you decide to walk to the park, it is extremely dangerous when you get to that bridge. I guess my question is the sidewalk completion to Vandora. I know we don't really ever want to encourage road crossing, but there's already a sidewalk in front of Buffalo Grove that I don't think will ever be connected to anything. And I don't know if it makes sense or if it's feasible to kind of have it go to that side and then connect from where Buffalo Grove sidewalk ends to the roundabout. It's kind of the typical Garner isolated sidewalk problem. I don't know if that would save money, but also don't know if it's potentially, I mean, it's always dangerous when you're trying to get people to cross, but I mean, those people will cross anyway to get to the side path. So I don't know if that's something to look at in terms of reducing the cost. And I don't know. And I guess the other question I have is sort of related, but sort of separate. There are a lot of people who complain about the constrained boathouse configuration. And there are a lot of people that go out to fish, and there's parking's bad, and I don't know what the relationship is with the town and Raleigh, and I know would have to coordinate with them because of the lake. But I think if there's a way to start a conversation with Raleigh or someone to maybe expand that area a little over the water, or just to make it more accessible, or a place where people can fish off of, like widen the boardwalks so people can fish, because they can go wherever they want to fish, but it's also just, I think it'd be kind of a cool destination space if it were wider, but.
It's a super tight spot. We certainly appreciate the tightness of the space for the boathouse, and it is something that we'll have to certainly have some conversations with the Raleigh utilities to see what's the vision long-term for that spot.
Maria, if I can just add to, the town had some preliminary plans years ago about moving the boathouse access to another location entirely. And so that's another option in addition to the current site.
And another bond referendum, I'm afraid.
I was going to ask about that in just a
Yes.
minute. Mr. Vance,
So yes, preferred alternative is one that I'm leaning forward with the curb and gutter. I agree with the minimize impacts to the natural environment, trees and shrubbery, and keep it in a natural state. The question is, I see that for alternative 2, there is the possibility, if there is some issues with right-of-way, to adjust over to the north side. When do you anticipate that happening? Do you anticipate that happening, or are you just preparing for it to happen?
I to be honest with you, because this all has been sort of planned based on GIS data, and until they get to specific surveying and looking at deeds and all that good stuff that comes with design work, We will not have a firm answer to that. I think the preferred option is for logistics, for just feasibility of people using it. The south side seems to be the optimal condition. If there's some really difficult easement challenges, or who knows if there's some long forgotten utility easement down there that we may not have information about, if that cannot be sort of addressed and resolved, we do have the option of going to the north side, where the current property owner has been kind enough to say we can certainly talk about that and would see it as an amenity. So we can kind of hold that as a potential if we find that the south side is really too complicated to make it work. Hopefully not. We're always hopeful that things will work in the way that will be. Again, it'll benefit so many residents of that have homes in that part of town, and there's quite a bit of growth also happening in that part of town. So this will be a very well used greenway, I believe.
I believe it will be very well used as well, very much so. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Manager, or either Ms. Maria, so the current bond that the town approved, how far does that take us along this project in terms of getting it started and completed? I'm trying to remember what percentage. I mean, you don't have to give me solid figures, but I mean, we passed those bonds with the idea that we were going to do something on this Greenway project, right?
We had about $10 million.
Million was approved. 10 million was
10 million was
approved in
approved.
the 2021 bonds for the Greenways project, so
Okay, and that was for this project, right?
this and any other projects the town may want to take on, but this was a primary project, is my understanding.
All right.
I have a question. Is there any planned participation by the county at all, or where does that stand?
As far as I can tell, no. And I believe this was a project that many years back, the county had provided a grant to the town, and the cost was sort of too high, so the grant was returned. I did sort of ask my counterpart at the county, is that money still available? And he said not at this point, but that does not sort of negate that in the future there could be some funding available for municipalities.
Yeah, I think
The county will, I'm sorry, Rodney, but the county will be bringing this Swift Creek Preserve Greenway all the way to Buffalo Road. So I think some of their investment would be very beneficial to connecting this area to the greater greenways in the capital area.
Yeah, that's basically what I was gonna say. Their focus now is to be more regional in connectivity and building a larger infrastructure from one lake to another, versus be more beneficial internal to Garner versus being part of the larger system.
So with that, there's less likelihood that the county would be a source of some revenue for this. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I guess the idea tonight is to provide some directions for next step. Well, there are two options. I think I've heard probably a consensus for, what is it, option number 2, I believe? Alternative number 2.
Yeah, number 1.
Excuse me. Number 1?
Curb and gutter, yes, number 1.
Okay.
Next steps, obtain council direction to proceed with Buffalo Road alignment. We got it. Pending above, plan for agenda item for town council approval for design to consultant to 100% construction documents. That's what we need to thumb up. And I think we all verbally have thumbed it up.
I'm going to find out by asking for a vote right now. So if you favor that one, okay, you can vote with your thumb if you want to. Yeah, okay, all right. Thank you, Ms. Singleton. All right. Anything else from you, Maria?
Thank you. We'll put an item on the consent agenda in the, hopefully before December, to get this project moving.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Mr. Hodges, you're up again. Street stub connectivity.
So, Mayor and members of council, at the recent meeting when there was some discussions about the project that had some proposed connections to Greenbrier subdivision, there were some questions asked by council and some discussions during and after the meeting about the proposed gate that was proposed and approved for the developer to use during construction, some questions that came up about the history of the use of gates on Spring Drive, some questions about what would have to be done should those gates not be taken out after construction as they were approved for. Mr. Singleton had sent an email and asked for us to share some information that Mr. Beasley had provided on the history of Spring Drive. And given all that information and given some of the unique challenges in working with both the UDO, as we've discussed before, and some limitations within the fire code that were not, there was not a reason for them to come up during the discussion at Greenbrier, but subsequent conversations caused us to want to share that information with you. We recommended that we provide an update to the Public Works Committee and then bring the discussion from the Public Works Committee to you for an update. So the Public Works Committee convened last week, heard from staff, and they asked us to bring this conversation forward to you tonight. So staff is here to provide a summary of that conversation, but then also recognize the Public Works Committee members to begin any conversation in follow-up to that. So tonight, one of the things we wanted to do was share some background information on Spring Drive, share some information about fire code restrictions, and then make a recommendation for post-development measures that we have the capacity to undertake for the project that has been most recently discussed, and then also some projects that have been approved recently by council where the question of street connectivity and the safety of stub streets that were non-conforming came into play. So tonight we have Tony Beasley, our inspections director, is here. He's going to present some information. Captain Don Johnson is here from Garner Fire. As you've heard from him before, he represents Garner Fire on the Technical Review Committee for Planning, and so we entrust him with doing the studies on response times and any other life safety issues in looking at plan review. So he is here for information and questions tonight, as well as Mr. Triesenberg is joining us remotely tonight, and he's here to be able to field any questions that might come up that cross over between the information presented and questions about the UDO. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Beasley and let him share some history and some information about fire codes.
Thank you, John. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. I appreciate the opportunity to be before you tonight. So Spring Drive with Garner High School, just a little brief history to backtrack that whole project so we get a little bit better understanding of it. I was the Economic Development Director at the time. We worked with Betty Parker, the Wake County School Systems, to buy the theater to put a 9th grade academy in. With that, they had a lot of students that were going to cross the road. The council had issued questions about the crosswalk. So the school first approached the town about trying to close that section of Spring Drive. Excuse me. And hurdles came up with acquiring additional right-of-way to put in a cul-de-sac on the other side of their driveway, relocating City of Raleigh utilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the cost of the project went extraordinarily high, and that died. The follow-up to that was, hey, what can we do instead of keeping police officers or school crossing guards out there all day? What can we do? And at that time, our attorney, Bill Anderson, worked with us to find an option. The option was traffic arms that would work as a security school crossing guard during the hours the school was there. But what that also did is it made NCDOT said, okay, Town of Garner, you're gonna have to take over this section of the road. And we took over the section of road. They gave up their ownership or whatever of a section of road from the stoplight just to right before you get to the drive into the back of the shopping center. Because DOT doesn't allow any kind of traffic control devices like that on any of their streets in permanent nature. So that was the option we looked at, and a couple of key factors for that is they were for limited hours, only when the school was in session. And days they were closed or it was teacher work day only, the arms were up. Also, those devices had an electronic override that if EMS, fire, police came up, as they keyed their mics 3 times on that frequency, the gates went up and they kept going through. Because really those arms were to act as basically a crossing guard to let kids get from one campus to the other. And if you go by there now, you can sort of still see where that right-of-way
was where the crosswalk used to be. They let it all grow back up and put it back natural after the school was built. So that was that portion of that. So that leads us sort of to the dead ends and connectivity a little bit. So in the fire code, it's very specific, and it tells us that and for many, many years, towns across the state of North Carolina put the fire code requirements on dead ends and stuff in the UDO so the developers could see it because they weren't necessarily builders. And it gave them a design guidelines, and that's the reason most UDOs and early zoning ordinance had these connectivity requirements and cul-de-sac length requirements in the UDO, but they're based in the fire code. So for the fire code, it tells us that we can't have a dead-end street stub over 150 feet unless we have a cul-de-sac or an approved T turnaround. And if you notice all the new subdivisions that you've approved in the last 4, 5, 6 years, you'll see that happening in each project that comes before you. And the reason you see it's because when they first submit projects to the technical review committee, they're just dead-end stubs, and there's houses built right up to that easement, even though it might be in the UDO. So by the time you see a plan come through, the fire department, the police department, all of us have gone through and vetted that, and they've had to change their design plan to show those T turnarounds on those dead-end streets that are more than 150 feet, or a cul-de-sac that's a lot bigger than the original design cul-de-sac that the town had in their development standards for roads that are deeper than 150 feet. So street stubs also have a minimum width depending on the length, but you can't have a dead-end street longer than 750 feet unless you get special permission from the fire official. Because once again, even though the road might go to 26 feet in width, for a dead-end road that's between 500 and 750 feet, at a certain point, the challenge and the risk exceeds the consequences. So there is an exception. The state of North Carolina always makes sure that they take care of the state. So there's an exception to the minimum 20-foot width of a road. And it is for roads constructed and maintained by NC.DOT for subdivision roads. And the question came up in the committee meeting, I think it's Wynn Road, because it's like 19 feet and some few inches. It don't meet the 20-foot standard. But the state says, hey, it's an acceptable street to NC.DOT standards, so therefore they're exempt from us as the fire code officials requiring that subdivision or that road improvement to go to the width that's required in the code. Also, in the fire code section 5035, under the section called required gates and barricades, it specifically prohibits gates or barricades on public streets, alleys, or highways. Prohibits. It allows it on private fire access roads, but not public roads. That's the reason most of the gates you see are always on private roads, private alleys. If you see a gated subdivision, they're private roads. They're not getting PAL bill funds, any community support funds for those roads. So the fire code matched the intent of DOT that you can't barricade or put gates up on a public road. And then the other two sections in the fire code are 50312 and what was Appendix D, which is now became mandated across the state by legislation from the General Assembly. It gives authority to the fire official when to require multiple access points, but it specifically defines interconnectivity to other developments. It's something you're supposed to consider and something that we recommend. So part of our TRC is our recommendation when we see the stubs is that interconnectivity. And as we sort of explained to the committee years ago, you didn't really think about even though they were stubbed for interconnectivity, nobody enforced the cul-de-sac requirements of the UDOs or T turnarounds because it was, hey, they're going to extend the subdivision next year. And that phase never took place. And then you had a dead-end street that's a safety hazard for the fire department and becomes a parking lot for some others. But that's sort of where the history came into, where now we get that T turnaround at a dead end automatically.
Thanks, Tony. So we want to give that background, answer the questions that have been asked by Mr. Singleton, give that background on sort of where some of the history of some of the things that are in our UDO come from, and some of the ways that they carry over to the fire code. Before we go any further with that, I'll pause and see if Jeff has anything that he wanted to add to the conversation tonight.
Mr. Triesenberg, I recognize you at this time, sir. I believe he's muted.
All right. So Jeff, you can just turn that on. If you do have anything, you can turn the camera on, let us know. So one of the recommendations that staff had that we've mentioned previously, but we just wanted to reiterate, is that because we own the traffic measurement tools that we use whenever there's a traffic calming request, one of the options that we have in front of us is doing measurements and studies with traffic at the time that these construction gates are in place, and then measuring them after the development is done to see if there's any increase in traffic or if there's any warrants that meet traffic calming. And then council could always consider traffic calming on some of these situations where we're required to have the connectivity, but there's still concerns from residents about some of the what is perceived to be cut-through traffic. So we just wanted to remind everyone that much like we measure these in existing subdivisions, there's nothing preventing us from going out and taking measurements before and after an event like construction or before and after removal of construction gates. Because we've had a number of these come before you, we're going to have more of these come before you. So we just want to make sure you were reminded of all the tools we had available to you, as well as remind you of the constraints we have both in the UDO and the fire code.
A couple questions.
Mm-hmm.
So when we approved that project, we approved it with a temporary gate.
Right.
You just read a code that said there can't be any gates.
I think that until the street is done, the street is open, I think that's what it's considered. Tony can answer the.
Yeah. So until that section becomes a public street, it could have gate. So until that project's finished, we do it all the time on all major construction projects where we will gate off certain parts during construction to protect the others. We've done it at McCullers Walk, both for the single-family subdivision section, the townhouse section, and the apartments behind Food Line out of 401. And we did it for Evolve Apartments on part of the Timber Drive extension or Timber Drive East, and then the little side street. Until it becomes a public street, then at that point it could still be gated. That was the reason we didn't raise much concern when we did the TRC for a temporary gate for construction. But when the project's done, that was the reason we said the gate would have to go away, because the street's a public street and it couldn't be gated.
I'm just curious why this wasn't explained during the council meeting, because I think the impression I got was that that part of the public street was never explained. It was sort of like, this is going to be temporary, and everybody was like, well, then we'll decide after. And the issue I have is, yes, we have these traffic measuring. I've been a party to requesting speed counts and all. To get traffic calming and all that stuff is so hard in this town, and to say after the fact, well, we'll measure and see if there's more traffic. Well, the whole point of connecting the road is to add more traffic. That's the whole point of the connectivity, is to make sure traffic can get through. And we're forcing traffic through these old neighborhoods that have been stubbed incorrectly for decades, but we're not designed to have that traffic go through. And in our Garner Forward plan, on multiple places it says, protect the character of our existing neighborhoods. And now I see y'all are bringing a lot of technical and this, but it's like, where's the thought around those neighborhoods? And we've already approved it. And it's like, and it's like, it seems like what's happened is it's kind of been not all disclosed up front. And now we're like, oh, well, it's going to connect no matter what, because all these regulations came out of, they've been there, but we weren't presented with those when we were making decisions on that connectivity spot.
Well, I think we have been, and what I'm observing in working with staff and council is we've been saying all along on several of these subdivisions, the UDO requires this. And that's why when the recommendation was made for construction gate, we didn't know this other information was needed until afterwards, and we're hearing people say, well, maybe the gates can just go away later. But the requirement's there for that connectivity on Cindy, and staff has said all along that one must connect.
I remember very explicitly, it was said when it comes back for special use permit, we can look at it again.
Let me suggest while we're processing that, Mr. Dallinger, I want to hear from the Public Works members for any observation, comments they want to make. I understand this information was presented to them, and I'd be interested to know if they have any particular comments or observation. Anything? Mr.
Mr. Vance?
Basically what you have received here is a condensed version of the information that was provided to us at the Public Works meeting on October 20th, and laying out the details, specifically going through what Mr. Beasley has presented to us, and also with Mr. Triesenberg providing the information with the understanding of the difficulty of trying to clarify what was presented at the council meeting when the Cindy Drive came to us. And during that particular session we had, it was clarified as to why certain things couldn't happen, such as a permanent gate. There was a discussion about one that came about Spring Drive and a gate being there, which we later learned that was not necessarily a gate, but it was some other type of configuration or arms that were being used, which are not gates, and the purchasing of the public road from DOT, which means that Garner takes responsibility for that. With Cindy Drive being a public road, it brought into a whole new mix when it came into the codes and the UDO, and to provide further clarification as to what can and cannot be done with the future development coming into place. Once it's a total build out, then the gate will be removed and it'll be opened back up. Understanding the sensitivity of the Briar Creek community,
Greenbrier.
Greenbrier community, and taking that into consideration, then we discussed, okay, what can be done, and that came into the play as to possible traffic calming devices if they are warranted. Then with consideration of a number of other factors, one being with the discussion about the timing of EMS response to Greenbrier, which would be cut down in half based upon the way it is now, roughly about, correct me if I'm wrong, about 5-6 minutes reaction time to get to certain portions of Greenbrier. With the connection from Grovemount to Cindy would reduce that time, correct me if I'm wrong again, to roughly half, about 3 minutes time, which would be great for providing that particular service to Greenbrier. So that was the pretty much discussion that was had, and knowing that we could not gate it based upon the UDO, that we were looking at alternatives of what can be done if they were warranted, and an alternative that can be done was to place in traffic calming devices, which would in turn slow down traffic coming through and out of Greenbrier. And it was also noted that by the length of the extension going into Greenbrier, that the traffic calming itself would be caused by the roundabout that's in place at the turn of Cindy Drive to go on to Grovemont. So it will be a relatively, that within itself will potentially be a traffic calming device itself, because you will not be able to speed straight through coming out of Greenbrier, going down to Grovemont to try to go on to points north and south. So that was pretty much the gist of the discussion, and they have, in my opinion, done a thorough job in providing information as succinctly and clearly as possible as to why a gate would not be warranted for that location because of the UEO requirements, and then trying to find a remedy as to knowing the sensitivity of the neighbors and not wanting the traffic to come through, speeding through there, as to what can be done. So that was, in my understanding, the gist of it, and if there's any further clarification that Mr. Singleton wants to provide, but that's the gist of it.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And Ms. Singleton, any comments, observations?
Well, a few things, and Mr. Dellinger's right, we did say we could discuss it at the UP part and come back and discuss it. We did say that. The thing that Mr. Beasley brought in regards to the fire code was that if it was over the however many feet, that you required to have the cul-de-sac or the turnaround, the hammerhead, the T turnaround, whatever you may choose to call it. So we discussed different options with them. They even came up in the meeting that you could make Cindy Drive a one-way road, one-way street, and that could be an option, but that option may not play out because people who live over there who aren't on Cindy Drive may actually like to have the cut through because they get on Timber Drive quick. you know, the thought was, and it's like, and I had asked about the measuring and the traffic calming devices added as warranted, because I think the concern over there is that people could leave and cut down Cindy and then get on to, it's Camellia, right? Mr. Johnson, you said Camellia, from Cindy to Camellia and Camellia to Winterlocken, right? Yes. Yeah. And that's where people have concerns, I think, in cutting through. So, but in the same voice, you could come back and say, well, people who live right down there may cut through Cindy to get on Timber Drive quicker to go to Timber Drive to head east. So that was mentioned also, was looking at a one-way. So the information, the biggest thing was per fire code that if you can connect down there, something's got to be put in, whether it's a roundabout, a connection, something has to be done for legal purposes by state fire code. We also asked some questions about Wynn Road. I was just asking because of the width of the road. We brought up that subdivision just to say, here's another example of a road that connecting to homes that have been there 30, 40 years, and then all of a sudden you may have a 295 unit or 395 unit, whatever it may be, that may connect to it. So that was discussed also. We didn't get really specific on that since it's still under discussion, but the fire code issue is, it has to be addressed one way or the other, whether you connect Cindy Drive, whether you put this in or put that in. From the standpoint of safety, something has to be done. And Mr. Beasley brought up the point that it wasn't done on Spring Drive because of relocation of utilities and so forth. So that's why that wasn't done on in that particular project. So, hey, we're open for other discussion. I told the staff after we met last week, you might as well prepare to talk to the rest of the council as long as you talk to us, and we were there for over an hour or so.
I'll just say, response time is a legitimate concern, and the speeding on Cindy Drive is not the concern. The concern is the speeding on Winterlocken that's going to happen, and on Greenbrier that's going to happen when people are cutting through to get to Jessup, to get out quicker on the 70 or to come through there, because it's the people who don't live in the neighborhood that cut through and speed and make it dangerous for people, and there aren't sidewalks in there. And we say we can do traffic calming. Without an HOA, the way it's written, it is a monumental task for a neighborhood to come together and try to get traffic calming done per the policy. Greenbrier might have an advantage because they actually organize themselves very well, but you know, it's just, you're increasing response time and creating more danger, because that's the whole point of creating this connectivity, is to generate more traffic. It's the whole point, and it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, I would observe, Mr. Dellinger, without arguing with you, that it makes sense to me that the town be in compliance with the codes that are that we have heard mentioned tonight. But let me get to a couple of other council members who haven't had a chance to speak. Maybe I was going to recognize Mr. Matthews.
I think, as brought up, traffic calming device, it's taken a while to get those seemingly put in. Is this something we could look at on the front side here with this project to put those in? Or do we have to wait and you got to do studies and all that? I mean, there's got to be a way we can work this thing out.
Well, traffic calming was added to the plan, so the roundabout is the traffic calming measure that the developer added at staff's, not direct suggestion, but suggestion of add some type of traffic calming. So suggestions have been given by staff. Mr. Triesenberg's camera is on, so he may have something he wants to add at this point or about any other points. But traffic calming has been added to the plan. So I don't know that whether or not we would want to go further than that and put other devices that may or may not be needed or wanted by people without knowing the history, knowing the actual numbers. And that's why we said traffic calming is there with the roundabout. We think that is going to do a really good job of curtailing some traffic, but if it doesn't and there's numbers that warrant it, you can always add them back. And I think the last few cases we've had have been very, very timely. We have timed those out. We've done the studies. We've worked with our paving contractor to get those added, and I think in many cases there's not been long delays in getting them implemented should we want to move forward with those.
I was talking about more into Greenbrier versus the new development. Traffic calming is what I'm saying.
We can. I will observe, though, that while some people may want that, we've had more people call us about Eagle Ridge wanting us to take the traffic calming out than we ever had people that requested them be put in. So I think it's a very slippery slope to make assumptions without the study about where they're going to be needed, because that's the reality of Eagle Ridge. You know, some of the homeowners association folks are very pleased with the outcome of it, but we receive a number of calls of folks who complain about those quite often. So I don't know that staff would recommend taking that approach based on the history we've had.
And in just a moment, if Mr. Triesenberg is available, I'd be happy to hear from him. But while I'm asking council thoughts, Ms. Behringer, I'll give you an opportunity if you have anything.
It's a difficult situation, but I think we're addressing it effectively with the options that we have. We're taking into consideration the input from all the different departments and what's important. The thing that bothers me the most about not opening that street up is the response time in case there's an emergency. You can't put a value on, just go around and it'll take 5 or 6 more minutes to get there when 1 minute might have saved a life. So I would have.
Mr. Triesenberg, are you available to us, sir, for any observations you care to make?
The only thing that I would say in response to, again, to Mr. Matthews, I don't want to speak for engineering or for Captain Johnson. But it's, in talking with them, doing that kind of stuff on the front end, that's really their call, because that's a maintenance issue and a response issue, depending on with what kind of apparatus they're responding. There's certainly planning supports traffic calming, but that's really going to be their call, since they're the keepers of the public streets and the primary impacted user.
Okay, sir. Thank you, Jeff. Council, we'll go around one more time and see what further concerns or observations you want to make. I don't think, let's see, we're receiving this as information tonight, is that right? Does the committee come with a specific recommendation, or just to receive this as information? And
Receive as information.
all right.
I have a question on the road stuff. Is it the developer required to turn all of their roads over to the town? Couldn't they make that little stub of Cindy private road, and then you could put up a gate that the fire department could get through and EMS could get through? Make that little stretch right there, that little 50 feet of private little road. Then you got a private road and public road, and you can have your connectivity and get your fire response through there, and you can not have cut-through traffic.
Raleigh Water, I believe there's a connection there that has to be made, and their Raleigh Water connections, the main lines have to be in a public right-of-way per their policy.
Does that have to be the road or just the right-of-way? You're like an easement, basically.
I would have to ask them specifically, but the way the policy reads, it specifically says public right-of-way.
I'm just trying to think creatively to achieve what the residents want, what fire and EMS need to do what they do best, and not create, more hazards that don't have solutions. I think Mr. Matthews is on, Eagle Ridge doesn't suffer through cut-through traffic. They've had their stable patterns there for years, so that's a different situation than an older neighborhood picking up significant amounts of new traffic. They also have sidewalks in Eagle Ridge as well, so there's a different dynamic. So the encouragement is for the town collectively to think creatively around meeting the residents, the developer, and response emergency needs.
Just, if I
Okay,
could-
hold on just for a minute, yeah. I would just argue creatively and legally, Mr. Dellinger.
Well, that's
And
the
I'm
whole
sure you're
point.
not-
Creative. That's the whole.
Well,
the law
okay.
is written, and if you can do it something creative that's legal, we should all be on the same page to try to make everybody, get what they need.
Yeah, I was just
Go ahead, yeah, Mr.
I was just going to add that I don't know the particular section you're talking about, but if you make anything a private road, then the property owners on either side of that road would be responsible for the upkeep and maintenance of it.
That would be the
And so-
HOA, right? Because it'd be, the developer is that part of the road that, they're building the part that's gonna connect. So they would,
Referring to Cindy Drive.
but they would,
Existing.
only the section of Cindy on their property would be the private road. You'd have 20 feet of private road right there.
But the issue still is that Cindy Drive is longer than 150 feet to the dead end. And when it was built, it should have had a cul-de-sac, and it was built to go forward.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't. So putting a gate up doesn't fix the hazard on their side of it being more than, it's 336 feet to the end of the road, and it can't exceed 150 feet without a cul-de-sac or a T-turnaround.
But it's not a dead end if you have a gate there and the road
Yeah, it's
connects.
dead end.
How is the gate the dead
Because
end?
it's-
Gates at the dead end.
Gates at the dead end. They have to get out of a
But it's
truck
not a
and,
public street
they have to
anymore.
get out of a truck and do something. A private access road is a private access road to the development, not
In the middle of one.
not in the middle of a public street. That's the difference in a private access road, private access fire road and a public street. So the connection would be that, but you still have the problem coming in from the Cindy side that you would be more than 336 feet. So the gate, they'd have to have a gate at 150 feet on their end, and then you'd have people in the middle that couldn't go nowhere. I mean, that's the issue with the gate. The gate's a little bit separate from the turnaround. The gates for access, the turnaround is based on distance. So there's two different issues that are there.
I'll send an email to the town attorney to help me answer the question, because if you need to make if you have property owners who are on that part of Cindy that would be willing to say, oh, you want to make it wider so you have a turnaround down here or whatever, they might say, sure, as long as you're going to put a gate there. I'll follow up, but just, again, as the mayor said, creatively and legally come up with a solution.
Well, and I would just like to address that on behalf of staff. I want to just give them credit for the immense creativity they've already shown for this development and a number of other ones. It may not always result in the outcome that you and neighbors are expecting, but our staff works very diligently every day. We've gone through multiple revisions of this plan to work with the developer. We've excused connections that as trained professionals, all of us, Mr. Triesenberg especially, to waive the other two connections that he waived goes against general planning principles. So we're being creative. We're being creative in the ideas. We're being creative in the interpretations of how we're trained and what we think is the right thing to do. And I just want to make sure staff is given the credit for the creativity that you may not always see, because things get changed many times before they get to you. And they're, I think, putting forth very good efforts. No amount of creativity is going to always solve the concerns of every one person, and I think that they are doing a great job of trying to think creatively many times when you may not see it.
I'm not trying to impugn anyone's creativity, effort, or expertise, but the more brains you get on a problem, the better solutions you can get. And we all have different perspectives up here, different than yours. We're representatives of the community and the residents. So we have to bring that to bear with zeal, right? And that's what our job is and your job, and somewhere in the middle, we come up with what works best for everyone, even if it's not what everybody wants.
Okay, anything else from other council members at this point? Mr. Vance, anything? Ms. Behringer?
Again, I just appreciate the amount of creativity that's gone into it with the staff. Really do.
Anything?
All right, second.
Matthews. Okay, thank you, John, and I agree. I've seen some of the work that staff does up close and personal, not a lot of it, but rely heavily on their expertise and their creativity. So at this point, I don't think there's a particular action item. This will, I guess, need to come back before council. Is that the wishes of council to vote on either a change in policy or a policy in general?
Staff was just bringing this forward to provide additional information based on conversations we heard during and after the last case. So there's nothing that staff is recommending that any action be taken on. We were just trying to provide additional context and conversation.
Okay. All right. Council satisfied? All right. We'll move along to the next item at this point in time then, and that is item 4 from our attorney, Ms. Jones, Business Registration Program Amendments.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to add, while Ms. Jones is getting ready, and also the work that was done for this particular development project and the connection with Cindy Drive, we will probably see similar requests coming before us again with other projects requesting the same thing.
No doubt. Okay. Ms. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Hopefully, this will be a lot less complex to deal with. The town has an existing business registration program. It's codified in Chapter 9, Article 2 of the town's Code of Ordinances. This was adopted in 2015 after the state basically repealed the ability to have privilege licenses. And currently, in-town businesses pay $25 a year to get their business registration, or in other words, license to operate within the town limits. The purpose, again, from 2015, was that it was in the public interest for health, safety, and welfare to have on file current information for businesses that are operating within the town for use by police, fire inspections, and zoning. Under state law, the city may regulate and license occupations, businesses, trades, professions, and forms of amusement or entertainment. You also have the ability to prohibit those which would be harmful to public health, safety, or welfare, order, or for convenience. To my knowledge, no one's tried to limit a business for convenience, but that's in the archaic statutory language. The city may also require applicants for license to be examined and may charge a reasonable fee. Now, there are some limitations on that within state law. And then similarly, in Chapter 160D, all of the powers that are granted under 160D may be exercised in the extraterritorial jurisdiction. So this includes planning, zoning, subdivision of land, building regulation, and also the separation of certain uses. So in looking at this ordinance, came about under a couple of things. One was the finance department, which has been implementing the business registration program, had some questions about interpretation. There are some needs within the UDO because certain uses are separated from other either similar uses, or the big example would be a sexually oriented business that has to be separated from a church or religious institution or a daycare. In order to be able to measure that separation, you need to know who's operating in the vicinity. So in looking at this, I worked with staff from the police department, inspections, finance, to come up with proposed amendments, which are included in your agenda packet. But basically, it adds a little more to the existing, it takes part of that purpose statement from the original ordinance and actually puts it into the codified version. It would expand the applicability from just businesses within the town limits to those in the ETJ. It would clarify what is exempt, and particularly there are some exemptions from state law. For instance, someone who holds an occupational license, one of the state boards, attorneys, doctors, realtors, surveyors, engineers, they are not required under state law, or the town cannot require them to get a special town license or be certified or examined under the town. However, we can regulate their business location and operation if they have employees or if they have the public or clients come to that space. The other big exemption under state law is what's called Transportation Network Company service providers. These are your Uber, Lyft, those kind that have a special state exemption. And then we'd also be exempting just residential use of property, with the one exception of home occupations where they're either providing services to the public or inviting the public potentially to that location within their house. Right now, the current ordinance, everyone has to register by July 31st of each year. This doesn't, it doesn't jibe with our fiscal year, doesn't jibe with the calendar year, and it's also a burden on staff to handle all of these registrations all at the same time. So staff has proposed to move that to a rolling 12-month period so that they'll be coming in throughout the year. There wouldn't be an impact on the revenue from this, but just easing out the staff time. It would also expand the information collected to enhance notification ability and verification of the use of property. So with the notification, you can see in that certain information was already being collected. So we're just clarifying the name of the business, the type of the business organization, the physical and mailing addresses, and the name of an officer or contact person, as well as an emergency contact person. And in addition to phone numbers, clarifying that this would be landline and cellular telephone numbers, as well as email addresses. And that would assist police and fire, other public safety, EMS, to be able to contact someone for either access to the location or, again, to know how many people are working at a particular location in the event that an evacuation has to happen. Also, days and hours of operation, and for seasonal, indicating what months they might be opened on a seasonal basis. Then clarifying the type of building occupancy to confirm that they are complying with the state building code, and then the property use to determine that they're complying with the Unified Development Ordinance. Staff would propose that this go into effect January of the coming year, and the business registration, rather than a paper form that's currently being received, it would be incorporated into the new development services software so that registrations could be done online. Would propose to prorate the fee for those registering between January and June, so that we can create this rolling 12-month and not have every business renewing at the same time. Basically, if they renewed early, they would only pay for part. They may end up paying more than $25, but they would get perhaps 16, months before their next renewal. And then to also allow updating throughout the year without a fee. So if their manager or their emergency contact information changes, they could be putting that in the system that would be accessible to police and fire inspections, planning staff. So tonight we're here, Mr. Beasley, as well as Mr. Triesenberg and Mr. Beck are here to answer any questions about the current system or the proposed system. If council is amenable to these amendments, we will place these on a future consent agenda for adoption. And then also the proposal would be to do outreach to the impacted businesses and properties before the ordinance amendments would go into effect, so that they know what's coming, and the fact that we're collecting a little bit different information, but it's really not impacting their obligation. It would also clarify for the ETJ, those that have zoning permits, that if they're operating a business, having the public there, having employees, that they would be doing a business registration each year as well, instead of getting one zoning permit or zoning approval when their use is approved. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you very much, Attorney Jones. Mr. Vance, I'll start with you, sir. Any questions?
I do not have any questions.
Mr. Dellinger?
No questions.
Ms. Behringer? Mr. Singleton?
No questions. I do this for our business. I have to do one every year.
No questions.
I had just one as curiosity question, and you may not have the information. I notice under section 919, the violation of this article will be punishable by a civil penalty of $100. I'm just wondering if, in an average year, make much money for violations, or maybe everybody pays up and does what they should.
Defer to Mr.
Just a
Beck
quick
on that.
answer, yeah, be fine.
Yeah, we don't really collect much in violations, because a lot of times we just don't know if someone hasn't registered. We don't really have a good method to figure that out. We do have some folks who, it is discovered and they'll pay back prior years that they missed. But as far as that civil penalty, that's rarely, if ever, enforced.
Thank you.
Typically, in order to get a building permit, a zoning, other approvals from the town, you're supposed to be registered. There hasn't, as my understanding, been an easy way to determine that, although when it is checked, generally the impacted party pays and, gets their registration up to date, and then they're not charged a penalty at that point. But that provision was in the original ordinance and not proposed to change at this point.
Okay. Council, if there are no further questions, then I believe this will come back to us on a subsequent agenda for adoption. I assume on a consent agenda, probably. Okay? All right. Thank you so much for that report, and thank you, council.
Do you remember why they changed privilege license, why they had to go to this program? Do you remember? No. Some towns,
The businesses
Raleigh,
didn't want to have to
and
pay
others
every.
were charging privilege license based on square footage. So if you had a big box, let's say a Home Depot or a Lowe's Home Improvement, they charge you for so much per square foot. So some people are paying thousands and thousands of dollars every year, and people started complaining. And also you had some towns that when you had another version of video games that would charge $1,000 a year per game. If you had 10 in your store, you had to pay $10,000 a year for the privilege of doing that. I have a customer in Wilson who had over 60 in theirs, and they did that for some time. But it would pay that much money, so it's over $60,000 every year, but it was legal. And if they didn't there, they were not allowed to have that use in that building. Anyway.
Okay. Some background there. Thanks, sir. Mr. Manager, we are to you for any, looks like pending agenda report.
Yes, and that's in the back of your agenda there. The other thing I'd want to mention is the town and Wake County are planning to have the fire station 5 groundbreaking on November 29th at 10:30. I know we sent the email out just to see if that fits with your schedule. So if you could let us know whether that's a good time. I think it may be settled by now that that's the time.
We asked until through tonight to make sure there wasn't a major conflict for a majority of council, and we have to confirm that tomorrow morning. So if that's, I see heads nodding, I think all the way around that's an okay time. And Ms. Behringer and Mr. Mayor had responded back. So we'll confirm that time tomorrow. Once it's 100% confirmed with the commissioners, we'll send you an email to hold the time.
I did mine
It was
today,
just
so-
at 10:30 a.m., correct?
10:30 a.m. on the
29th,
29th.
Tuesday the 29th.
Tuesday, the 29th of November, and we're trying to get it between the holidays and the county commissioners that are currently in office, no longer being in office. And so that's why we're that week is the limited amount of options that we offered.
Okay.
Okay.
Maybe by 10:30 in the morning, the cold air of November will have warmed up a little bit. Who knows? Okay.
The other thing we needed your RSVP on, the Summit Awards, the Chamber Summit Awards, November the 10th at 6 o'clock. So we have a table that we basically reserve for council and other town staff. So let us know if that's something you want to.
I believe the invite
Attend.
included a significant other or spouse for a council member if they wanted to attend.
If you're planning to bring someone, we may exceed our 10, and if so, we'll try to work with the chamber on that. But they have asked us for that information as soon as we can get it to them. So Mr. Matthews just indicated he had two. Ms. Behringer cannot attend. Mr. Mayor had indicated he would be there. So if Mr. Vance or Mr. Dellinger or Mr. Singleton plan to attend.
Let them know.
Okay.
Okay. Was that all, Mr. Manager?
I have a handful more, just to
excuse me.
kind of let you know some events that are going on in and about town. Early voting continues at Avery Street Recreation Center until November the 5th. The G-Package Showtime Series kicks off October the 29th with the Americana Bluegrass Band New Blue. And you can go online to get more information about that. G-Pack is offering a 2-for-1 deal on tickets to the show. So go to GarnerPerformingArtsCenter.com for more information. Trick or Treat the Trail is Monday, October 31st from 3 to 6 at White Deer Park. And it's a free, family-friendly trick-or-treating event with dozens of local businesses and organizations handing out treats. And the last downtown night market of the season is Friday, November the 4th from 5 to 9 p.m. The open-air market features locally made goods from Garner area artisans, as well as food, drinks, and live entertainment.
Okay.
That concludes
Thanks,
my
sir.
reports.
Anything from the assistant managers? And Ms. Jones? Opportunity, right? Well, okay. All right, council reports. I'll start with Mr. Singleton.
No, nothing at this time. I do recall the unrestricted yard waste pickup begins next Monday, the 31st. Okay, I know Mr.
That is correct. It starts the 31st and will be for the next few weeks afterwards, following the regular routine schedule.
Thank you. Ms. Behringer? Mr. Dellinger?
Nothing.
Mr. Vance?
No report.
Mr. Matthews?
Nothing, sir.
All right. I think that covers the agenda. Unless anybody else has got an item related to tonight's business, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, motion made and seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? There is none. I declare this meeting of the town council to be adjourned. Thank you all for your time and for your participation. We'll see you at the first meeting in November, I guess.